She spent 30 years grading papers at a classroom desk. Now she graded them in the driver's seat of her car. Evicted and homeless, the retired teacher was a hidden statistic until a local news story revealed her living in a parking lot. The broadcast was seen by one of her former students. He was now the mayor, and he was holding a key that would rewrite the end of her story. Margaret Williams taught American history to over 2,000 students, but the pension system she paid into for 3 decades failed her, a reality facing 1 in 5 retired educators. Her story is not an anomaly, it's a systemic collapse. How does a woman who built futures end up sleeping in a sedan? And what did her most famous student remember that the system forgot? The answer begins 25 years ago in a third-row desk. Room 203, Margaret Williams didn't just teach dates and treaties, she taught perspective. To the restless boy in the third row, Marcus Johnson, she presented the Constitution not as a static document but as a living argument. She saw his sharp mind buried under the noise of a difficult home life. She was the one who stayed after school, who provided the quiet space and the second chances. She told him, "The arc of history bends, Marcus, but it needs hands to bend it." He listened. He became one of her success stories. Margaret taught in the same district for 32 years. Her salary, like that of most teachers, never kept pace with the city's soaring cost of living. She rented a modest one-bedroom apartment, careful with her money, believing in the promise of her state pension. That pension was her safety net, the reward for a career of service. But the system was quietly breaking. Across the country, teacher pension funds were being strained to the point of failure. By 2019, the median teacher pension was only 70% funded. For retirees, the math was brutal. In many states, including Margaret's, a teacher with 30 years of service might retire on an annual pension of just $35,000. When she finally retired at 67, Margaret's monthly check was $1,800. Her rent was $1,400. The math left no room for error, for illness, for inflation. For 3 years she managed. She clipped coupons. She skipped medications. Then the building was sold. The new landlord issued a notice. Rent would increase by $400 a month. Margaret showed him her pension statement. He shrugged. It was a business decision. She had 60 days. She reached out to the district's retiree assistance office, only to find it had been shuttered due to budget cuts. She contacted a nonprofit for elderly housing, but the waiting list was 3 years long. The system she had served had no infrastructure to catch her. On a Tuesday in October, the sheriff's deputy posted the final eviction notice on her door. Her car, a 2011 Toyota Camry with 140,000 miles, became her home. She parked in the lot of a 24-hour supermarket, rotating between spots to avoid suspicion. She used the store's bathroom to wash up. She kept her belongings in neat stacks in the trunk. And every evening, under the dome light, she graded papers from the online tutoring gig she'd taken to survive. The work kept her mind sharp. It also broke her heart. Meanwhile, Marcus Johnson's arc bent upward. He went to college on scholarships, became a community organizer, then a city councilman. He ran for mayor on a platform of addressing the housing crisis, speaking passionately about the city's soul. He won. On the day of his inauguration, he quoted a teacher who told him history needs hands to bend it. He didn't know her hands were now trembling from the cold. The local news segment was meant to be a human interest story about the rise in vehicular homelessness among seniors. The reporter approached a car in the supermarket lot just after dusk. Inside, Margaret was reviewing an essay about the New Deal. The camera light flooded her window. With dignified weariness, she spoke plainly about the numbers: her pension, the rent increase, the eviction. She didn't cry. She stated facts the way she once taught them. "There's a disconnect," she said softly to the reporter, "between the value placed on the work and the value placed on the worker after the work is done." The segment aired at 6 p.m. Marcus Johnson, the new mayor, was eating dinner at his desk, reviewing a housing policy brief. He had the local news on in the background for noise. He looked up at the sound of a familiar, steady voice. He saw the woman in the driver's seat, the gray hair in its neat bun, the glasses on her nose. He dropped his fork. The plastic clattered on the laminate. The briefing papers slid to the floor. He knew that face. It was the face that had believed in him before he believed in himself. It was his third-row desk. It was history, and it was living in a car. He stood up so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. His chief of staff, hearing the noise, rushed in. Marcus pointed at the screen, his mouth open, but no words came out. The reporter's sign-off echoed in the silent office. A heartbreaking portrait of a retirement forgot. Marcus found his voice. It was a whisper, raw with disbelief. "That's Mrs. Williams." He turned to his stunned aide, his own campaign words about compassion and action now ringing in his ears as the cruelest irony. "Get the car, we're going right now." The mayor's sedan screeched into the nearly empty supermarket lot, headlights cutting across the asphalt. Marcus Johnson didn't wait for his security detail. He was out of the car, the cold night air hitting him, his eyes scanning the rows of vehicles. Then he saw it. The beige Camry. The dome light was on. He could see the silhouette inside, a head bent over a clipboard. His approach was slow, deliberate, his dress shoes crunching on the gravel. He came to the driver's side window. He saw her. Up close, he saw the deep lines of fatigue, the careful way she held her pen, the maroon cardigan buttoned to the neck. He crouched down, bringing his face level with the glass. Margaret Williams looked up, startled by the shadow at her window. She peered through the glass, her eyes adjusting. She saw a man in a suit, his expression fractured by a pain so deep it was physical. It took 3 full seconds. Her lips parted. Her hand went to her mouth. "Marcus." His voice was thick, shattered. "Mrs. Williams." He watched her process it. The student, the mayor, here, now, at her car door. A wave of something, shame, relief, overwhelming dignity passed over her face. She composed herself with a teacher's practiced calm. She rolled down the window. "Mayor Johnson," she said, her voice steady. "This is a surprise." He had prepared nothing. The speech about compassion, the housing policy points, they evaporated. "I saw the news," he managed. "I didn't know, I am so," he couldn't finish. The apology was too small, too late. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she used to when he was making an excuse for unfinished homework. "You weren't supposed to know, Marcus. This isn't your doing." "But it's my city," the words burst out raw. "I stood up there and gave speeches about leaving no one behind, and you were here in a parking lot." He looked past her into the car. He saw the folded blanket on the passenger seat, the thermos, the stack of student essays. The reality of it, the intimate, grinding detail of her survival, hit him like a blow. "May I sit?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. She hesitated, a flicker of pride. Then she nodded, gesturing to the passenger seat. He opened the door, moved the blanket carefully, and sat down. The car was cold. It smelled of old upholstery and peppermint tea. The space was so small their shoulders almost touched. For a long moment they sat in silence, the dashboard lights casting a faint glow. "It's not just the pension," she said finally, breaking the quiet. She spoke to the windshield, her tone factual as if presenting a case study. "Though that's the foundation of it. 1,800 a month doesn't stretch like it used to. The rent increase was the last domino." She turned to him. "But do you know what they don't tell you about teacher pensions, Marcus?" He shook his head, a student again. "Vesting," she said. "If you leave before a certain number of years, you get nothing, no employer contribution. I had colleagues who taught for 15 years, moved for a spouse, and left with only their own contributions and a pittance. I was lucky. I stayed 32. I'm one of the few who gets the so-called full benefit." She gave a soft, hollow laugh. "This is full." Marcus listened, the policy briefings in his mind colliding with her lived reality. The statistics were no longer abstractions. They were the temperature in this car. "I have a tutoring gig," she continued, tapping the papers on her clipboard. "Online, it helps, but the Wi-Fi is inconsistent." She didn't need to say she used the supermarket signal. He looked down. In his hand, he realized he was still clutching the key. The key to the vacant city-owned property his staff had identified months ago, a small cottage slated for a future affordable housing pilot. He had grabbed it from his desk drawer on a frantic impulse. He held it out, a simple silver key on a plain ring. "This is for you," he said, his voice rough. "It's a house. Well, a cottage, city-owned. It's yours for as long as you need it. No rent." Margaret stared at the key. She didn't reach for it. Her hands remained folded in her lap. The refusal was silent, profound. "Mrs. Williams, please," Marcus pleaded, confusion and desperation mingling. "Let me fix this." "Fix it?" she said softly. "Marcus, you are offering me a key. That is a profoundly kind gesture, but it is a gesture. If you give me this key, you fix my asterisk problem. For now. What about Mr. Gable, the chemistry teacher who retired 2 years before me? He's in an RV that keeps breaking down. What about Susan from the English department? She's 72 and shares a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other retirees because it's the only way to make the numbers work. You saw me on the news. We are not news headlines. We are a systemic condition." Her words hung in the cold air. She wasn't rejecting help. She was reframing the problem. The student had become the mayor, but the teacher was still teaching. Marcus lowered the key, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying a key is a solution for one person. I am one person. I am also a data point." She took a slow breath. "You want to help, don't just get me a house. Ask me how I got here. Ask me what broke." So he asked, and she told him. She told him about the annual cost of living adjustments on her pension that were consistently below actual inflation, a slow erosion of buying power year after year. She told him about being in a state where teachers like her were barred from participating in Social Security, so her pension was her sole safety net, and it had a hole in it. She explained the housing cost burdened metric, spending over 30% of income on housing. On her income, even her old rent had put her over that line. The increase had been catastrophic. She spoke not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had done the math because her survival depended on it. She was, in that moment, the most powerful policy advisor he had ever encountered. "I have files," she said, reaching back to the neatly organized box in the rear footwell. She pulled out a folder. Inside were not just her personal bills, but printed articles, studies, highlighted sections on pension underfunding, on the growing trend of districts building teacher housing because salaries couldn't compete. "I've had time to read," she said, a wry smile touching her lips. Marcus took the folder, his fingers brushing against the meticulous notes in the margin. In the dim light, he saw her handwriting, the same precise script that had once covered his essays in red ink. This was her new lesson plan, and he was, once again, her only student. The sound of another car pulling up broke the spell. His security detail had arrived, along with his chief of staff, Lisa, who stepped out looking anxious. The scene, the mayor sitting in a beat-up car with a homeless woman, was a political hand grenade. Lisa approached cautiously. "Sir, we need to, the press could." Marcus looked from Lisa's worried face to Margaret's calm, expectant one. He held up the folder. "Lisa, we're not leaving, not yet." He turned back to Margaret. "Will you come with me, right now, not just to a house, to my office? I want you to tell my entire housing and finance team what you just told me. I want them to see this folder." Margaret studied him. She was evaluating his intent, the same way she once evaluated whether a student truly understood an essay's thesis. "This isn't about saving face or a photo op." He met her gaze. "This is about me finally doing my homework." A slow nod. "All right." She began gathering her papers, her movements efficient. She opened her car door, the interior light flooding out. As she stepped out, she staggered slightly, her hand flying to the car roof for support. Marcus was there instantly, his arm out. She steadied herself. "The cold," she said simply. "It settles in the joints." But he saw it. The profound exhaustion, the physical toll the last months had taken. The dignity was a facade over a body pushed to its limit. The urgency now was medical as much as moral. He helped her into the back of his town car, the folder clasped in her hands. Lisa got in the front, shooting Marcus a look of bewildered alarm. As they pulled away, Margaret did not look back at her Camry. She looked ahead, through the windshield, at the city lights. In the mayor's office, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the scene was surreal. Margaret Williams sat in a leather chair usually reserved for corporate CEOs. Around the conference table sat the city's housing director, the head of social services, the budget director, all looking between the retired teacher and their shell-shocked mayor. "Start from the beginning, Mrs. Williams," Marcus said. "Tell them everything." And she did. She spoke for 45 minutes. She didn't appeal to emotion, she presented evidence. She quoted the Brookings Institution on pension underfunding. She cited the NEA on housing cost burdens. She used her own budget as a case study. She talked about the fear that keeps retired teachers silent, the shame that prevents them from asking for help. "We spend our careers being pillars of the community," she said. "Admitting we are crumbling is difficult." The room was silent. The budget director, a man known for his austerity, finally spoke. "The pension system is state-controlled, Mayor. Our municipal leverage is limited." "Then we find the leverage we do have," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We own property, we have zoning authority, we have a housing trust fund, and we have a moral obligation that just parked itself in our conference room." He turned to his housing director. "The cottage. Make it ready for Mrs. Williams by tomorrow. No red tape. Cut it." Then he looked at Margaret. "But that stopgap, what's the real fix? You've done the research, what's the first step?" Margaret leaned forward. "A census," she said. "You don't know how many of us there are. Retired teachers, support staff living on the edge or over it. You can't fix a problem you haven't measured. Start there. A confidential survey sent to every retiree in the district. Find the Mr. Gables and the Susans." It was a simple, brilliant, actionable idea. The kind that comes not from a consultant, but from the ground zero of the crisis. As the meeting broke up, Lisa pulled Marcus aside. "Sir, the press has the story. The news station is running with it. They've connected the dots. Mayor's former teacher homeless. It's going to be everywhere by morning. The narrative is forming, either you're a hero or a hypocrite who let his own mentor fall through the cracks." Marcus felt the walls of political reality close in. The pure moral impulse of the parking lot was about to be fed into the grinding machinery of public opinion. "What's the opposition saying?" Lisa checked her phone, her face grim. "Councilman Riggs is already drafting a statement. He's calling it political theater and special treatment. Asking why a single retired teacher gets a city-owned property when there are families on the waiting list." The critique was predictable, and it stung because it held a sliver of truth. The key for Margaret was both a solution and a vulnerability. He walked back to Margaret, who was now sipping water, looking small amidst the large, empty office. "There's going to be a storm," he told her honestly. "People will say I'm helping you because you're my teacher, that it's favoritism." Margaret set down her cup. "Is it?" "Yes," he admitted. "It is. If it were a stranger in that car, would I have driven there at night with a key? I want to say yes, but I don't know." Her expression softened. "Then use it," she said. "Use the fact that it's me. My story is your leverage. If the system can fail someone who taught the mayor, it can fail anyone. Make that the story. Turn the special treatment argument on its head. The question shouldn't be why her. It should be, if not her, then who? And if the answer is no one, then you have a much bigger problem to explain to the voters." In that moment, Marcus saw the strategy. The personal connection wasn't a liability. It was the ultimate proof of concept. It made the systemic failure undeniable, personal, and urgent. At 2 in the morning, a city worker was changing the locks on the cottage. At 2:15, Marcus drove Margaret there himself. It was small, a little worn, but it was warm. It had a kitchen, a bathroom, a bed that wasn't a car seat. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing. She stopped in the middle of the living room and didn't speak for a full minute. When she turned to him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Marcus." He handed her the key. This time she took it. He left her there with a promise to send someone with groceries in the morning. As his car pulled away, he watched her standing in the doorway, a silhouette framed by the light, holding the key. It was a victory, a small, personal, monumental victory. But back at his desk, the incoming emails told a different story. The press inquiries were escalating. Councilman Riggs had gone on the late-night radio show, his voice full of righteous indignation. "This is a misuse of public assets. Where was the mayor's key when the Johnson family was evicted from the Oaks complex last month?" The backlash had begun, and Marcus knew this was the easy part. The hard part was coming next. He had promised a census, a systemic solution. He had raised expectations not just for one teacher, but for a hidden population of retirees, and he had made a powerful enemy in the process. He looked at the blank document on his screen, the beginning of a policy memo. The title was simple: The Retired Educators Stability Initiative. He typed the first line, guided by the lesson he just relearned. If the system is failing those who built our future, then the system itself is the crisis. But as he prepared to build a new system, the old one was mobilizing to protect itself. The battle for a key was over. The war for a principle was just beginning. By 7 a.m., the story wasn't local news. It was national. The headline wrote itself: "Mayor Rescues Homeless Teacher, His Former Mentor." The footage of Marcus crouched by the car window played on a loop. For many, it was a stunning act of compassion. For his political opponent, Councilman Riggs, it was a weapon. Riggs held a press conference on the steps of City Hall, flanked by supporters holding signs about fairness and city resources. He didn't mention Margaret by name. He spoke in broad, fiery strokes about two-tiered systems and backdoor deals. Why does one person get the key to a city home because she has a personal connection to power, he thundered, while hundreds of others wait in line? The narrative he crafted was potent, not a story of systemic failure, but one of political favoritism. Inside the cottage, Margaret watched the press conference on a small television Marcus had sent over. She saw her life reduced to a political talking point. She saw the comments scrolling online, some calling her a hero, others a pawn, a few accusing her of planning the whole thing for attention. She turned off the TV. Her hands, which had steadied a clipboard in a cold car, now trembled on her lap. The safety of the walls around her felt suddenly fragile. Marcus's team was in crisis mode. Lisa, his chief of staff, laid out the brutal calculus. "We have 48 hours to pivot from a human interest story to a policy rollout, or Riggs owns the narrative. The Retired Educators Stability Initiative can't just be a memo. It needs teeth, funding, and a face that isn't just yours." "I have the face," Marcus said quietly. He picked up the phone and called Margaret. She answered on the second ring. "I saw," she said, her voice tired. "Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you something enormous. I need you to stand beside me when I announce this initiative, not as a victim, but as the expert, the one who diagnosed the problem. Will you do that?" The line was silent. He could hear her breathing. "They will tear me apart, Marcus. They already are." "I know, and I am asking you to walk into that anyway. Because if you don't, the story stays about a key and a favor. If you do, it becomes about why the key was needed in the first place. It becomes about all the Mr. Gables." Another pause, then the clear, firm tone of a teacher accepting a difficult task. When and where? The press conference was set for noon the next day, but the opposition wasn't waiting. That afternoon, a leak hit the local paper. Details of the city-owned cottage were published, along with its assessed value. The article pointedly noted that the property had been quietly removed from the upcoming affordable housing lottery. The implication was clear. Marcus had stolen a home from a needy family to give to his friend. It was a devastating twist. Even some of Marcus's allies grew nervous. The special treatment charged now had an address and a price tag. Margaret, working from the cottage, made her own calls. She reached out to the retired teacher she knew, Mr. Gable, Susan from the English department, a dozen others. She didn't ask them to go public. She asked for their data, their monthly budgets, their rent or mortgage payments, their medical costs. She compiled it all, anonymizing the names, creating a spreadsheet that told a story of collective, quiet desperation. She emailed it to Marcus with a single line. "This is the evidence. The cottage is one house. This is the city." Armed with that data, Marcus and his team worked through the night. The initiative evolved. It wasn't just a survey anymore. It was a three-part plan: an emergency housing voucher program for retired educators in crisis, a legal aid fund to help navigate pension appeals, and a partnership with local nonprofits to build dedicated senior housing on underutilized city land, a model already seeing success in California. But as they finalized the plan, Lisa got a call from a contact in the state controller's office. Her face went pale. She put the phone on speaker. The voice on the line was hushed, anxious. "You're poking a bear, Marcus. The State Teachers Pension Fund Board is hearing about this. They're worried your little local initiative is going to shine a spotlight on their solvency issues. They have lobbyists, powerful ones. They're already calling council members, urging them to vote down any funding for your plan. They don't want anyone looking at the books." This was the "wait, it gets worse" moment. The problem wasn't just a lack of housing or low pensions. It was a deeply entrenched financial system terrified of scrutiny. The pension fund, underfunded by billions, had made risky investments to try to close the gap. A wave of early retirements or a public loss of confidence could trigger a disaster. They saw Marcus's humanitarian effort as an existential threat. Councilman Riggs, it turned out, had received significant campaign contributions from firms that managed those pension investments. The conflict of interest was suddenly, starkly clear. His opposition wasn't just philosophical, it was financial. Marcus sat back in his chair, the scope of the fight now fully revealed. He wasn't just battling for a policy. He was challenging a powerful, interconnected financial machine. "So it's not just about winning a news cycle," he said to Lisa. "It's about taking on the people who profit from the status quo." The next morning, Margaret arrived at City Hall through a back entrance. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair in its neat bun. She carried her folder of research and the compiled spreadsheets. In a small side room, Marcus briefed her on the new obstacle: the pension board's opposition. Margaret listened, nodding slowly. "Of course," she said, "the system protects itself. It would rather we blame each other, tenants versus retirees, my key versus someone else's missing key, than examine its own foundations." She looked at him. "Then we don't talk about the pension board, we talk about the people. We make the numbers human. We make *me* human, not a symbol, a person." At noon, they walked onto the stage together. The room was packed, cameras flashing. Marcus stepped to the podium and did something unexpected. He didn't start with a defense. He started with a story. 25 years ago, in room 203, I learned that history isn't about dates. It's about cause and effect, about the consequences of choices systems make. The woman standing beside me taught me that. Last week, she also taught me what happens when those systems break. She showed me the math of her survival, and she gave me a new lesson, that one person's crisis is a data point for a systemic failure. He then introduced the Retired Educators Stability Initiative in detail, announcing the Emergency Voucher Fund with an initial allocation of $200,000. He presented Margaret not as a beneficiary, but as the chief community advisor to the program. Then he yielded the podium to her. The room held its breath. Margaret adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, the cameras, the council members, including a scowling Riggs. She did not smile. She spoke with calm, devastating clarity. "I'm not here because I am special. I am here because I am visible. For every retired teacher you see on the news, there are a dozen you don't. They are in apartments they can't afford, skipping medications, praying their car doesn't break down. They are invisible by choice, because of pride, because of shame. She held up her folder. This is not my budget. This is an average, based on the confidential data of 17 of my former colleagues. The average retired teacher in our district spends 62% of their monthly income on housing and health care. The federal definition of cost burdened is 30%. We are living in a state of permanent financial emergency. She then addressed the elephant in the room. I have been given the use of a city cottage. I am profoundly grateful for that security. But that key is not the solution. It is proof that the solution is missing. If the only way to fix a broken system is through a personal connection to the mayor, then the system is not just broken, it is corrupt. We are not here to create more exceptions. We are here to build a rule that no one who dedicates their life to educating this city's children should spend their old age wondering where they will sleep. The room erupted in applause from supporters, but Councilman Riggs stood up. This is a touching performance, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. But it doesn't change the facts. This initiative is an unfunded mandate. It takes resources from other vital programs, and it's built on the emotional blackmail of one well-connected individual. Margaret turned to face him directly. Her teacher's gaze was steady, unflinching. Councilman, you are correct that this is about connection. You are connected to the firms that manage our pension fund, which is currently underfunded by an estimated $4 billion. Would you like to discuss where those resources have gone and why protecting that system seems to be your priority? A stunned silence blanketed the room. Riggs's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The cameras swung to him, capturing his panic. Margaret had not just defended herself, she had flipped the script. The question was no longer why her, it was why him. The press conference ended in chaos, with reporters shouting questions at Riggs. The story instantly transformed from a debate about a cottage into a scandal about pension fund influence. In the aftermath, Marcus was exhilarated but wary. You blindsided him, he said to Margaret back in his office. I did my homework, she replied. A reporter sent me the campaign finance links last night. I connected the dots. But the victory was temporary. By evening, the pension board's lawyers had issued a statement calling Margaret's allegation reckless and defamatory, and demanding a retraction. Riggs, recovering, went back on the offensive, suing the mayor's office for misuse of funds to establish the voucher program without full council approval. He sought an injunction to freeze the initiative. The legal battle would tie them up in court for months. The emergency help was stalled. And Margaret, now a central figure in a political and legal war, found the cottage no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a bunker. A week later, a certified letter arrived for her. It was from the property management arm of the state pension system. It cited a clause she had never noticed in her retirement paperwork. It stated that if a retiree was deemed to be engaged in activities that brought the retirement system into disrepute, their benefits could be subject to review. The letter was a warning shot, a threat to the $1,800 a month she depended on to live. They were coming for her pension. The system wasn't just defending itself, it was counterattacking. The key to the cottage had opened a door, but now a far more powerful force was trying to slam it shut on her fingers. Margaret sat at her new kitchen table, the legal document before her, the warmth of the house suddenly feeling like a trap. She had fought for visibility, and now she was in the crosshairs. The personal had become perilous. And the only way out was to go further in, to fight not just for a home, but for the very foundation of her survival. The lesson was no longer about history. It was about power, and the final exam was just beginning. The threat to her pension was not a bluff. It was a siege weapon. Margaret stared at the legal language, the cold bureaucracy of the words meant to paralyze her. $1,800 a month. That was the line between stability and the car. They knew it, and they were prepared to cross it. She called Marcus. His rage was quiet, terrifying. They're trying to bankrupt you into silence." "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "We fight," he said, "but not in court, not yet. We take it public, every bit of it." That evening, Marcus posted the pension board's threat letter on his official social media channels. He didn't comment. He just posted it with a simple caption: "This is the response to a teacher asking for dignity." Then he tagged every major news outlet in the state. The reaction was volcanic. The story, which had been about housing and political favoritism, instantly morphed into a story about retaliation and intimidation. Editorials asked a damning question: is the pension system so fragile that it must threaten a 70-year-old woman to survive? Reporters dug deeper. They found the campaign contributions linking Riggs to the investment firms. They found the pension board's own reports showing the deepening underfunding. The reckless and defamatory allegation Margaret had made was now the lead story on the evening news, backed by documents. Public pressure became a tangible force. Retired teachers from across the state, many who had been silent out of fear, began calling the pension board's office, sharing their own stories of financial strain. A group of them organized a silent vigil outside the pension board's headquarters, holding signs that read, "We taught your children. Now you threaten our homes." The image of elderly educators in raincoats standing in the drizzle was powerfully damning. 4 days after the letter was made public, the pension board called an emergency meeting. In a tersely worded statement, they announced they were withdrawing the review notice to Margaret Williams, calling it a miscommunication. They did not apologize, but they retreated. It was a victory, but a defensive one. They had stopped the attack. They hadn't changed the system. The legal injunction against Marcus's voucher program, however, was still in place. The case was scheduled for a hearing. Marcus's city attorney was pessimistic. "Riggs has a point about procedure," he told Marcus. "You moved fast. The judge might rule we need full council approval to allocate those funds." Losing in court would not only stall the initiative, it would be a huge political defeat, emboldening Riggs and his allies. They needed leverage. They needed to change the story from whether asterisk to help to how asterisk to help. Margaret provided the answer. She asked Marcus, "What does the city own that isn't being used? Not property, something else." After a day of research, Lisa came back with a surprising answer. "Land," she said. "The school district owns about 75 acres of undeveloped or underutilized land across the city. Parking lots, old annexes, vacant lots next to schools." An idea, modeled on the successful projects in California and Hawaii, began to form. What if the city and school district partnered to build affordable housing specifically for educators and school staff on that land? Not as a social service, but as a workforce retention strategy. It would bypass the need for the contentious voucher fund. It would create a permanent asset, and it would require the school board's approval, not the hostile city council. Margaret loved it. It's a solution that builds something new instead of fighting over the scraps of the old system. Marcus took the proposal to the school board superintendent, a former principal who remembered Margaret fondly. He saw the data on teacher turnover linked to housing costs. He saw the success stories from other districts. He agreed to bring it to the board. The school board hearing was packed. Teachers, both active and retired, filled the seats. Marcus presented the plan not as charity, but as smart investment. "Every time a great teacher leaves our district for a suburb where they can afford to live, our children lose. This is about keeping talent in our classrooms." Then Margaret spoke. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about the young teachers she saw in the online tutoring forums, struggling with student loans and impossible rents. "We are not asking for a handout," she said. "We are asking for a hand up, so the next generation of educators can do what I was able to do for 32 years, focus on the children, not on the rent." The school board, removed from the toxic city council politics, voted unanimously to explore the partnership. It was a monumental shift. The initiative now had a path forward, even if the city council fought it. This move isolated Councilman Riggs. His argument about misuse of city funds was irrelevant to a school district project. His influence was waning as the pension scandal eroded his credibility. Sensing the shift, two council members who had been on the fence publicly withdrew their support for his injunction. The day before the court hearing, Riggs dropped his lawsuit. He claimed it was to avoid unnecessary legal costs for the taxpayers. Everyone knew he was surrendering. The injunction was lifted. The emergency voucher fund was activated. Mr. Gable, the chemistry teacher in the failing RV, was one of the first recipients, getting a grant to cover a security deposit and first month's rent on a stable apartment. Susan from the English department got help negotiating a lower rent with her landlord through a legal aid grant. The system Margaret envisioned began to work, one person at a time. But the true payoff was larger. The public momentum from the crisis forced the state legislature, which had long ignored the pension crisis, to hold hearings. Margaret was asked to testify. She sat before a panel of lawmakers, her folder of data and her personal story her only weapons. She was respectful but unflinching. She ended her testimony by saying, "You have the power to bend the arc. Do not let the weight of the status quo be stronger than the promise of the future you ask teachers to build every day." A bipartisan bill, though modest, was drafted to increase state oversight of pension fund management and study cost of living adjustments. It was a first step. The door had been cracked open. A year after the night in the supermarket parking lot, the transformation was visible. Margaret still lived in the cottage, but it was now part of a pilot program, the first 3 units of what would become Educators Village, a development on former school district land. She helped design the community room. Marcus kept his word. She remained the community advisor, a paid position that supplemented her pension. The public saw the arc of the story as a feel-good tale, teacher rescued by grateful student. But those who lived it knew the truth. It was a story of systemic failure, confronted because a personal connection made that failure impossible to ignore. The key wasn't the symbol of rescue. It was the tool that unlocked a larger fight. Then came the final surprising detail. On the anniversary of the news report, Marcus was cleaning out a filing cabinet in his office when he found an old, folded piece of construction paper. It was a card made for him in the 3rd grade. On the front, messily written, were the words, "Thank you for teaching me." He opened it. Inside, in a child's handwriting, was a sentence, "You believe in me." The E in believe was missing. Beneath it, in the familiar, precise red ink of Margaret Williams, was a caret mark inserting the missing E, and a note, "I do believe in you, Marcus. Never forget the power of seeing what's missing and having the courage to add it." He had written her a thank you card 25 years ago. She had graded it, and she had kept it. He brought it to her at the cottage. She took it, her eyes misting over. "I kept all of them," she admitted softly. "Every thank you note, every card, they're in a box. When I was in the car, I couldn't look at them. It hurt too much. They were proof of a life that felt gone. Now they were proof of a life that had meaning, that had ripple effects she could never have calculated in a lesson plan." The boy who couldn't spell believe was now the man who had fought to make her believe in security again. The documentary could end there with the neat resolution, but real change is messier. Councilman Riggs lost his re-election bid. The pension reform bill passed, but in a watered-down form. The Educators Village broke ground, but would take 2 years to build. The crisis for retired educators nationwide persisted. Yet something fundamental had shifted. A blueprint for action now existed, a template for how to move from a single shocking story to sustainable policy. And a teacher, once grading papers in a car, now sat at a new desk in a warm home, reviewing architectural plans for a village that would ensure others would never have to do the same. The lesson was complete. The student had learned, and the teacher finally could rest. Margaret and Marcus's story found its resolution in a key, a village, and a graded thank you note. But the true end of this story isn't a happy ending for two people. It's a question mark for a nation. How did we build an economy where the people entrusted with building our future cannot afford their own? Margaret Williams was one retired teacher in one car, but the data tells us she was never alone. The median teacher pension is only 70% funded. In many states, more than half of all teachers leave before they even qualify for that pension. For those who do retire, annual incomes between $20,000 and $50,000 are the norm, while housing costs consume larger and larger portions. This isn't an anomaly, it's architecture. What Marcus did in that parking lot was an act of personal redemption. What happened afterward was a political education. He learned that systems don't fail by accident. They fail by design, a design that prioritizes abstract financial stability over human dignity, that protects its own machinery even when that machinery is grinding people down. The backlash against Margaret, the threat to her pension, wasn't malice from individuals. It was the immune response of a sick system. This story is a case study in how change actually happens. It doesn't begin with a policy white paper. It begins with a specific human face pressed against the glass of a specific car window. It gains power when that face is recognized, not as a symbol, but as a person with a name and a history. The personal connection wasn't a corruption of the process. It was the catalyst that made the process necessary. It transformed a statistic into a story with a heartbeat. And a story with a heartbeat is the only thing powerful enough to crack the walls of institutional indifference. The lesson here isn't that every homeless teacher needs a former student who became mayor. The lesson is that every crisis of invisibility needs someone with the power to see and the courage to be seen looking. It's about the transformative power of refusing to look away. Margaret taught Marcus to see the missing E in believe. He later learned to see the missing security in her retirement. That act of seeing and then acting upon what you see is the most powerful political force there is. So the lingering question this story leaves us with is not about teachers or pensions or housing. It's about vision. Who in your world is living in a metaphorical car, their struggle quiet, their dignity holding back despair? What system have you accepted as immutable that is, in fact, waiting for someone to point out the missing piece? Change begins not with grand plans, but with a simple, terrifying act of attention. It begins when we stop asking why them and start asking why not. If this story of a teacher, a student, and a key reminded you that our shared humanity is the ultimate policy tool, then subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more narratives that don't just tell you what happened, but show you how the world can be reshaped, one act of courageous attention at a time. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a single act of seeing change the course of something larger? We would truly love to hear your story. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for remembering that the future is built not by systems, but by people who choose to look and then choose to act.